Welcome back to another week at Cheney Baptist Church. I'm Pastor Daniel, the Associate Pastor, and I'm joined with Dr. Keith Peters, the Senior Pastor. Now, with this week being Mother's Day, are you going to break away from your series, or are you going to continue your series, but with mothers as the focus?
I had thought about that since we're in the middle of the principle of cultivation. And of course, a mother's job in large measure is to cultivate the heart, the mind, even the body of her children. But this morning, as I was preparing for my message, I'm going to go a little bit differently. There's a scene in Matthew 15. We were talking about Matthew 13 and the parables of the sower and the seed. In Matthew 14, of course, Jesus feeds the multitude, walks on the water. People come to him across the Sea of Galilee, and whoever comes to him and touches him is healed. And then chapter 15 I was reading this morning, and it just struck me that conversation takes place between the Pharisees about traditions, and Jesus said, "You're making the law of God of no effect because of your traditions." And he focuses specifically on how they dishonored their mothers and their fathers, breaking the fifth commandment. And then Jesus elaborates on that, and then he goes out of his way. As far as I can tell, the first time he leaves the nation of Israel, goes to modern day Lebanon and a place called Sidon, or Tyre and Sidon, in the end of chapter 15. And the only record we have of what he did there is a woman, a Canaanite woman, a Syrophoenician woman, a Lebanese woman, comes to Jesus and begs him to heal her daughter, who was demonized. And Jesus says no. And that's just caught my attention. But this woman, as a mother, doesn't take no for an answer. And she pleads with Jesus. She strikes up a conversation, and in such a way that Jesus stops and says, "Great is your faith." And the woman's daughter is healed immediately. And then Jesus goes back to Israel. And that has been on my mind all morning this morning. And I think the cultivation, what was it about this woman? Why did Jesus make this trip? There's no record that he met in a synagogue, no record that he met with anyone else. It's almost like there was this woman that Jesus knew was not even Jewish. But she was a mother whose heart was breaking for her daughter. And I'm going to focus on what makes the heart of a mother so powerful when it comes to touching the heart of God. And so we're going to spend a few moments just looking at some of the characteristics of this heathen woman, and yet a woman who, as far as we know, had no teaching about the God of Israel. But when Jesus showed up, she recognized him. There were a couple of people in the Old Testament, even Jesus mentioned, there were many lepers in the days of Elijah, but only the heathen Naaman got healed. There were many widows in the days of Elijah, but who did God send him to? A Syrophoenician woman to provide for that mother and her child. So God has a real heart for mothers, because I think mothers reflect something significant about God's heart. And we're going to look at this heathen woman to see some of those characteristics.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people have the excuse for not reading the Bible, as in, oh, the books are too long. But if you think about it, if the Gospels, for example, are covering 3 or more years of Jesus' life, question is, why are they so short? And some people, they want to know more about what Jesus did, but yet John, for example, and kind of his conclusion in John chapter 20, verse 30 through 31, he says there's many other signs that Jesus did, but they couldn't be contained in these books, but these are written, right? It implies that John chose specific things in Jesus' life, recorded it because he said, because these things can help you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you can have life through his name. So what that means is, because the books are so short in comparison to how long they're covering, everything that's in there is there for a reason. It wasn't just someone's like, what else can I write about? Well, there was this time this woman asked for her daughter to be healed. yeah, I can write that, right? That they're intentionally, and God is directing them to write exactly what they wrote. They could have written about so many other things, but they chose to write about that woman, or in Matthew at least, he chose to write about that woman. And the question becomes, why did Jesus at first say, is it right to give the food to the dogs rather than the children, or something like that? That basic concept. Why did he say that, knowing that he was going to, knowing what was going to happen? And I think part of it was to have the woman go through the point of where she needed to have faith. And yeah, so many times the centurion, he wasn't Jewish, but yet he had more faith than the rest of them. Yeah. Naaman was another person that, like you were saying, God healed. And we have to ask the question, why did the author include this? And why did Jesus say what he said? And why did he change his answer after she showed faith and stuff like that?
And it is amazing that I don't see Jesus commending many Jews for their great faith, but as you pointed out, he did it, to my memory, two people. The centurion, who said, I'm a man under authority and not a man of authority. He was, but his focus was, you're the supreme authority. Jesus said, I've not found that great a faith even in Israel. And this Syrophoenician Canaan, this basically, as far as what the Jews would have considered a heathen woman. The reality is, she had some level of faith. We don't know what she knew about God, but she'd called Jesus Lord. Mm-hmm. It is entirely possible that the news of what Jesus had done had spread even to the country surrounding Israel. But the amazing thing to me is, as you pointed out, Jesus was there on purpose. So was he toying with the woman when he basically said no? And I don't think so. I was asked recently, someone had given a testimony and had observed that he feels that his prayer life, his faith has grown more in the last year of his life, maybe than all the years before in his Christian experience. And I asked him, why do you think that is? And he later called me and said, why do you think that is, Pastor? I don't remember what his answer was, but I remember telling him, I said, this has been a rough year for you. You've been faced with some incredible obstacles and incredible disappointments, and you've been forced into, forgive the expression, I don't want to call it graduate school prayer, more like high school prayer, but most of our prayers are about what we want, and we expect God to give us what we want if he is in fact a good God. What are we going to do when Jesus says no? What happens to our faith when God's will is not our will? And that is where our faith really both reveals itself and grows deeper. We've been talking about the parable last week about the sower and the seed, and the seed that fell on stony ground. There was a little soil, but the stones were there. And during the drought, Jesus said, if the stones are in the way, the roots can't get deep, and the sun's going to wither it. And I believe times of disappointment are times in which we have to struggle with. Cambodia, where he met Rasul, and through that trip, Rasul has become part of our ministry team. He's been a blessing to us over the years. He shared a little bit more details of his life. He is recently married. It's his wife's birthday, so he said, I'm going to go to America for your birthday. But I know he misses her, and I've asked him to take just a few minutes to catch us up on his ministry.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Mother's Day to all of you. And I am Rasul. I'm 31 years old, and I only have one wife. So we just got married.
He was born in a Muslim family, by the way.
Yeah. I was born in a Muslim family, and my name means Prophet of Allah. So, but now I'm serving in Cambodia. I was 23 years old when I went to Cambodia for internship. I supposed to stay for 3 months only, but God changed everything. And I have been a missionary to Cambodia for 8 years already. And I'm so humbled and honored to be here, finally. And thank you so much for your prayers. Thank you for your giving to missions. You are part of what's happening in Cambodia. Cambodia is a Buddhist nation, and 96.80% are Buddhist. But thank God, because God is continuing opening the door for the gospel. And now I just want to share with you our ministry in Cambodia. We have different ministries for kids, different ministries for young people, different ministries for adults. And we are reaching 140 to 150 people involved in all our ministries. And you are part of that. And my desire is to, by the way, I'm from the Philippines and missionary to Cambodia. My desire is to develop more Cambodian leaders and to train Cambodian pastors. And we are so excited to see Cambodian missionaries. And we're looking forward to send out from our church ministry 1 missionary, 2 missionaries in the future. And please pray for us as we do our ministry, as we fulfill the Great Commission in Cambodia. And also, we just launched the second church of Global Surge in Phnom Penh 2 months ago. So we have 2 churches already in Cambodia, and the third church under Global Surge started last October. So we are starting the third church of Global Surge in Phnom Penh. So I'm so blessed to see in 8 years, because before I just started, like, there are only 3 or 4 missionaries were there, but whenever we have meeting under the Global Missionary Clearinghouse, the missionaries are about like 20. So some missionaries are in the provinces. We have the youth camps also, like what we have in the Philippines, and we bring that in Cambodia. And also the Bible school, we just started in Cambodia last October. The Bible school where I graduated also in year 2013 in the Philippines. So thank you so much, and I'm so blessed to be here. I should have come earlier, but I got denied 5 times for US visa. I started applying 2015, denied 2016, 17, so I just got my visa 2021. And finally I got a chance to be here. And thank you so much for your prayers. Thank you that you have been supporting the ministries and me personally in Cambodia. And I pray that God will continue to bless you all. Thank you.
And every mother, every father, I believe, has known some level of disappointment. I know I have. And it's, what are we going to do when God doesn't perform for us? Mm-hmm. Are we going to keep believing when God doesn't make sense? And I think that woman is a model of holding on. She risked so much to come to Jesus, and Jesus risked so much to respond to her. Mm-hmm. He was surrounded by Jews, and it was not even lawful to go into a home of a non-Jew. Here he is in their country. Mm-hmm. And then this woman comes to him. We don't know where her husband is. She's not Jewish, and she pleads with Jesus. And Jesus turns to her, and I don't think he was really weighing the impact this was going to have on him. But this woman had no basis. She wasn't even Jewish. She had no basis to make any requests of God, but she had a need. Mm-hmm. And the need was the daughter that she loved, whom Satan had demonized, or a demon had taken possession of. And I think that tugged on my heart as a parent. And I just, for some reason, I just feel led to focus on this woman and the incredible faith she had when faced with so many obstacles, including Jesus saying, no.
Yeah, exactly. And we can see several times where mothers, such as in the story of Elijah, if I remember correctly, the child died and the mother became upset. She's like, why did you save us through the famine if you were just going to let my son die? Am I thinking the right story?
That would be Elijah, that built the prophet's chamber.
Yeah.
No, that was Elisha. The lady didn't have a child, and God asked her to give her the child.
That's right. So he gave him the child, and then the child died. And it's just interesting because the mothers, obviously, they have this heart for their children. So do the fathers, but mothers express it a lot better probably. And she's over here negotiating or talking to this prophet because she wants her son back. And what she was asking, she didn't have a right to ask for, right? The Lord gives and the Lord can take away. But you're right in the sense that the Lord did bring back the life, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
It's been a while since I've read that particular passage. But it's just interesting because so often we shy away from asking God for impossible things because, well, one, we think it's impossible, but two, we think that we don't deserve it. And it's good to be humble, right? And to be humble before God. But at the same time, the Bible says you receive not because you don't ask. But when it comes to these mothers, in the case of the New Testament and the Old Testament example, both of them had a need for their child, for the safety or even the life of their child, and both of them pleaded with God, even though they didn't deserve it. God graciously gave it.
Yeah, and I think when Jesus talked about great faith, this was a radical faith that had no basis in hope other than the mercy and grace of God. So many times our prayers are so safe. Our faith is so, well, I don't know. I don't even have an adequate word. Just untested, untried.
Like
whatever, God. We're kind of like the teenager. Whatever. Yeah. Do whatever you want. We don't really mean that, but we don't really. Often it's only in times of overwhelming need that we really pour our hearts out to God, like this woman did, or like the woman did to Elijah.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, we often pray safe. Even when we're praying for healings, we'll often pray, and it's not necessarily wrong, but we'll pray that God would guide the doctors, right? Because we think God's not going to do a miracle. He's just going to do something safe, right? He's going to guide the doctors, and the doctors will get the glory for it. But I think sometimes God wants us to, like Gideon, see that there's no way the 300 people could defeat the army. He says, there's too many. It's too many people. I need less. Or else they'll get the glory. And sometimes we need to pray for things, expecting that God can do it. And that's always the thing. You and I know God can do whatever he wants. And we're humble enough and probably, I hate to say wise enough because that doesn't sound very humble, but experienced enough to know that just because God can doesn't mean he will. And Job cried out, why are you doing this? Obviously, God had the power to take all that pain away, and he did eventually. But God had a reason that Job did not know at the time. Yeah. So a lot of times what may seem like lack of faith is not that we don't think God can, it's that we don't know if God will. But yeah, I think God does want us to pray in a way in which we know he can, but also in a way in which we believe he can do the impossible when we ask for it, so that he can prove himself. Not as a test to him, but just as a natural cry out to him, knowing that he is that powerful.
Come to thee for trust, helpless look to thee for grace. Thou art to the fountain fly, wash me, Savior, or I die. While I draw this fleeting breath, when mine eyes shall close in death, when I soar to worlds unknown, see thee on thy judgment throne, rock of ages cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee.
Let's pray. Dear Lord, we come to you when we thirst. We come to you as our defense. Lord, we come to you when we are in need. You are the good shepherd. You guide us to the waters, to the green pastures, Lord. Just as we are here to be filled with living water, oh God. I pray that you would open our ears and soften our hearts to receive that which you give so freely. I pray that you would bless the sermon and just speak through the pastor today, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you. The children can be dismissed for children's church and little church at this time. Join me in the book of Matthew, please, chapter 15. Now, we're going to do something a little bit different. We always recognize our mothers on Mother's Day, but we're going to do that at the end of the service. Kids are going to have a lesson about moms, I'm assuming, and a little presentation at the conclusion of the service. So those of you that know me know I am the original ADD pastor, so that's on my mind now. It won't be on my mind later, maybe. So I told David, wave to me, throw things at me, but if I do things like normal, someone say, wait a minute, Pastor, and we'll get back on track, okay? We've been in a series this year so far on principles for a productive life, and we were talking about last week the principle of cultivation, and I was preparing a message because who better models that principle than a mother and all the things that she's trying to grow in the heart of her children. But the Lord kind of redirected me this week, and I'm going to preach on a passage I've never preached on in the 36 years I've been a pastor, but I couldn't really get away from it. And giving you a little background, Jesus in Matthew 13 gives us those principles of the harvest and principles of cultivation, and remember the sower and the seed. Chapter 14 we know because, among other things, Jesus fed the multitude, and then he sends the multitude away. He sends his disciples to the other side, across the Sea of Galilee. He goes to the mountain to pray, and then a huge storm strikes up, and Jesus walks through the storm to the disciples in the end of chapter 14. And then when he gets to that place, I think it's Gennesaret, his reputation had preceded him. It wasn't too far away that Jesus had healed the demoniac, and now Jesus is in that particular region, and the multitudes are coming to him, the men of that place, when they knew Jesus was there and his reputation had preceded him. They sent out to all the country round about and brought to him all that were diseased. The people who brought the people, not the people who were sick, the people had enough compassion and awareness to realize Jesus is here. He doesn't live here. He may never be here again. And the Spirit of God motivated them to go throughout all the countryside and invite the people who were hurting and infirm and weak. And then they went to Jesus. And those who would come to Jesus, and the Bible says if they would just touch the hem of his garment, were made perfectly whole. Doesn't that remind us of the lady who did that? And then chapter 15 takes a bit of a turn. Pick up reading with me in chapter 15. Then came to Jesus the scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem. Isn't it amazing? Some people would travel many, many miles to get to Jesus for ministry and for healing. The Pharisees and scribes went out of their way, some 100, 120 miles out of their way, only to find fault. They weren't there looking for Jesus for wisdom or help. They were looking for fault. And Jesus' disciples were eating without ceremonially washing their hands, and they made a big fuss about it. And why do your disciples transgress the traditions? And Jesus said, why do you break the commands? We all have traditions. Mother's Day is a tradition. And Mother's Day didn't originate, certainly America wasn't the only place that honored mothers, but back in the Civil War, there was a lady named Ann Jarvis who I believe was a Sunday school teacher. And it was in the middle of the Civil War, and her heart was breaking, not just for all the young men who were being killed because of the strife, but for the mothers who were praying and grieving and every day waiting for the horrible news that maybe it was her child or her son that was killed. And she just reminded in a little Methodist church, I think in Virginia or West Virginia, we need to be praying for all the mothers. One of those students was her own daughter. I think she had 11 kids, and one of those was a little lady named Ann. Ann would never become a mother, but she never forgot the broken heart of her mother, praying for mothers. And Ann picked up the torch and started campaigning in her area, in her church first, and then in her community, that we ought to honor mothers. have a special day for mothers, and she worked so hard that by the time she died, it had become a national holiday. That's America's tradition and how that started. Scott had sent some other traditions back in ancient times about honoring mothers as well. But the real, I hate to use the word tradition, the commandment of God is honor your father and your mother. Honor in the Old Testament language of Hebrew, honor in the New Testament language of Greek, both mean the same thing. Give weight to them. See, money was valued by weight. Doesn't matter, it doesn't mean stuff your mom so she weighs a lot. It means give value to your mother and, of course, your father. And Ephesians says the same thing. It says, this is the first commandment with promise. Remember, the 10 commandments were on 2 tables. The first 4 were our relationship with God. The last 6 were our relationship with each other. The first commandment on the second table of stones was this one. How we relate to others hinges on how we relate to our moms and our dads. Right? That's why God says that's the first commandment with the promise. The Old Testament says it will be well with you if you get a hold of the value that you ought to give to your mother and father. And they weren't. In fact, the self-righteous Pharisees, as their parents got older, they didn't want to take their money and help support their mom. So they would say, Corban, I'm going to dedicate everything I have to God. Now, they still spent it, but in their minds, it was a gift to God, so they would neglect their aging parents. And Jesus said, you are breaking the law of God in order to honor your religious traditions. And then he just made the statement, in vain you worship me because you're teaching for doctrine the commandments of men. And then he talks about it's not what comes in that defiles us. What's defiled is already inside. The heart. Clean the heart. Let God clean the heart, clear the conscience, and then you'll be able to see God clearly. And then Jesus did something that was just so unusual. I'll show it up here. Jesus took a detour to Lebanon. Almost all of Jesus' ministry was in one area, Israel, with 1 or 2 occasions where he crossed the Sea of Galilee and went over onto the other side. But this time Jesus intentionally left Israel and went to what is modern-day Lebanon, ancient Phoenicia. Why did he go there? We have it in front of us. I'll share the whole passage with you on the screen so you can see it. There's no explanation. No Jews that he ministered to, nobody that he healed. Some would say, well, he needed a vacation. I don't think it was Jesus' needs that drew him there. I think it was the need of the only person we have a record of, other than the immediate disciples, that intersected his life. And that need was what the Hebrews would consider a heathen woman. A Syrophoenician woman, I think Mark calls her. And against all odds, this woman intersected her life with Jesus and walked away a different woman. So here's the story. When Jesus went up to the coast of Tyre and Sidon, modern-day Lebanon, ancient Phoenicia, and by the way, that's where Jezebel was from. She was the princess of Phoenicia. There were idol worshipers. They worshiped Baal. And that's why in the Old Testament, the princess of Phoenicia married King Ahab and tried to murder all the prophets of God. So that's a little bit about the background of this area. Behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and said, have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. For my daughter is grievously vexed with the devil. Now that shouldn't surprise anyone. They worship devils there. Baal demanded this child sacrifice. And this particular child, her daughter, hadn't been sacrificed, but she had been infected by the idolatry. And the Bible tells us very clearly that when we sacrifice to idols, we're sacrificing to devils. Now, I want you to understand, we know a little bit we know what we know about Jesus Christ. But here's this broken-hearted woman, not Jewish, not a worshiper of God as far as we know, comes to Jesus, intersects him somewhere on the road, and said, have mercy upon me, Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed. And Jesus ignored her. Now, I want you to try to put yourself. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about different parents that brought children that were demon-possessed, or that woman with the issue of blood for 18 years, and their last desperate hope coming to Jesus. I want you to try to be this mom for a moment. Try to understand. We know the father with the lunatic child. Jesus said, how long has he been like this? And said, from a baby. And sometimes the demon would cast him into a fire, sometimes into the water. Remember that story? Think about this lady. We don't have the background about how she was vexed, but we know that there was a demon that was controlling her daughter, and it was breaking her heart. She comes to Jesus, and he ignores her initially. His disciples didn't ignore her. They said, send her away. She has no right, no claims. She's not even Jewish. So get the picture of what must be going on in this woman's heart. She had undoubtedly heard about Jesus. Remember that old song, it is no secret what God can do. What he's done for others, he'll do for you. With arms wide open, he'll pardon you. It is no secret. This woman had heard about what Jesus did to others, and somehow in her mind she's thinking, if I could just get to Jesus. And she makes whatever sacrifice. We don't know where she lived. We don't know how long she had traveled, but she hears Jesus. We don't know how long she had been waiting on the side of the road, because rumor had it that Jesus was coming. And Jesus ignores her, and the disciples reject her. But Jesus said to her, now Jesus is engaging with her, I'm not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. What Jesus is basically saying is, I'm the Messiah to the Jews. What is Jesus doing here? Is he toying with her emotions? No. But doesn't it seem, could she not reach that conclusion? Oh, you don't love everybody? Wait a minute. She didn't have what we have. She didn't have John 3:16. She didn't know what Jesus was about to do, not just for Israel. But Jesus said, I am sent, my ministry on earth now is for the house of Israel. But how were the house of Israel handling Jesus? But then, after that, first of all, indifference, and then explanation. After that, she came and worshiped him. Lord, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter really what you do. I know who you are. Remember what Job said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Remember when Job chapter 1, Job lost his 10 kids, lost his wealth, lost everything he had. How did he respond? The Lord gave, the Lord took away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And he worshiped. So there's something, we're getting an insight into the heart, the broken heart, granted, but the heart of this heathen woman. In the face of rejection and explanation that didn't meet her need, she worshiped him and simply said, Lord, help me. He answered, it is not meet, it's not appropriate to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. Are any of you confused about this interaction? I was when I first read it years ago. What's going on? Did Jesus just call this woman a dog? What I'm trying to say is this woman had no hope. And she went to the only source, maybe a last desperate attempt. True, Lord. That's right. You don't take the food that was prepared for your family and you give it to the dogs. But notice what she said. But the dogs eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. So many people read, if they read at all, they read on the surface and pass judgment on Jesus. This is a huge test to reveal the heart of this woman. Just like Job was a huge test to reveal the depths. What will it take to destroy a faith? That was Satan. That was Satan's gamble. And then Jesus answered and said, "O woman," not dog, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt." And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. I'm not going to be long this morning, but I do want to unpack a little bit of what's going on here. The heart of a great mom. Great moms overcome great barriers. What are the barriers this woman had to face? Inadequacy. What had she done to try to help her daughter? What doctors did she go to? What witch doctors did she go to? Did she go to the altar of Baal and plead on behalf of her daughter? We don't know, but we know that this woman was a desperate woman. And like every mother here, there's nothing they wouldn't do to try to fix something broken in the heart of their children. And she realized, I can't fix it. Steve and Kim are not here this morning, and they're going off for a weekend, but I can remember when God finally answered their prayer after almost 10 years and gave them a little girl. And in the womb, the doctor said, this girl will never live. Little bravely. And against hope, they held on in faith. But it was a terrible disappointment. And I could remember the devil just ganging up on Steve, and Steve comes to me and opens his heart up, and both of their hearts are broken. They had purposed against the doctor's advice. They were not going to kill their baby. They were going to give God every opportunity, and they let Bravely be born. I was there. The doctor said she's not going to be born alive, but she was. Then she's not going to be able to breathe, but she breathed. It was such a shock. I was there. The doctors didn't know what to do. I was sitting with them in the NICU. I said, well, there's a tent right there. What would you do with any baby born prematurely? It's like Pastor Keith is telling the doctors what to do with this miracle child. So they started taking care of Bravely, and she lived just over a year. But I remember during all of that, Steve came to me, and the one thing I know I can't fix this. I just can't fix this. And I think of that mom. I can't fix this. Moms, have you ever been dads? Have you ever been in a situation, someone you loved, hurting, prodigal perhaps, physically, emotionally, relationally hurting, and you can't fix it? There are many seasons in our life, moms and dads, boys and girls, where we're going to come face to face with our own inadequacy. I can't fix this. Her inferiority. I know this was written 2,000 years ago, but we all understand prejudice, and there's a huge amount of prejudice from the Canaanites against the Jews. Does that still exist, by the way? The Arab nations want Israel erased. Still there. And to be honest, there was prejudice from the Jews they called them dogs. That was the reference Jesus was making, the heathen dogs. She was that. She knew. Remember the Samaritan woman at the well? Why are you speaking with me? You're Jewish. There was a huge amount of prejudice in this culture, and she knew it. And she knew she had to go to a Jew to ask for help. The ultimate act of humiliation. And of course, Jesus ignored her, but what did the other Jews do? Get rid of her. And then, of course, she had to overcome her own uncertainty. Did she have she'd never met Jesus. Jesus had never dealt with another non-Jewish woman. He had only dealt with one other non-Jewish man, the servant of the centurion that I can remember. She had nothing to base her faith on. Nothing to base, I can use this precedent. Nothing. So the whole trip and the whole time, all that uncertainty, would Jesus have compassion on me? So great moms overcome great obstacles. They're powered by great love. The only rational explanation why she would overcome all of these barriers is her daughter. The love of her daughter. It was more powerful than her shame. Remember the woman I told you about her a couple of weeks ago, the woman with the issue of blood just kept bleeding? Probably a period that just never stopped for 18 years. But that made her unclean. She couldn't touch a man. If she sat on a bed, nobody could sit on that bed. She couldn't go to the temple. She was unclean, even though she was a Jew. This woman was unclean because she was not a Jew. She was a heathen. And she had to overcome the shame of her own nation, her own nationality, her own practices, her own worship of an idol. It is entirely possible that her choices left, hear me carefully, I'm not going to dig too deep here, but this is a wound. It is entirely possible that her choices left her daughter open to demonic influences. Remember what we talked about, honor your father and your mother? The first commandment is have no other gods before me. I'm a jealous God. I will visit the iniquity of the fathers and mothers to the children. There's a psalm I used to teach my kids. We sang it in church at communion last week. Remember not the sins of my youth. Moms, Dad, do you ever see the sins of your youth being reenacted with your own children? Now, I don't know why this daughter was in the condition she was, but her mom may have had some of the responsibility, maybe taken little daughter to the Baal worship, maybe taking her little daughter as others would sacrifice their children. I don't know, but I know the culture, I know the customs, and I can feel the shame she might have had. Have you ever seen something happen in your kids and you feel this is my fault? Any honest parents here? What I've done in the past. Oh God, remember not my sins. It didn't hit us until we saw it in the hearts and the eyes of the people we love more than our own lives. I believe she felt that shame. I have felt that shame. And then the doubt. Remember the father of the boy who had demon-possessed? And Jesus said, if you can believe, all things are possible. What did he base this? Well, I'm Jewish. Jesus is Jewish. This woman had nothing to base her faith on other than the person of Jesus Christ. What did the father say? Lord, I believe, but I don't believe a lot. I've been so disappointed. I've been so riddled with my failures and my shame and my guilt and my grief and my anxiety and all those sleepless nights. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. She certainly had doubt. And of course, fear. She lived, hear me carefully, she lived with a demoniac. We don't know how old her daughter was. Could have been a teenager, could have been an adult. She lived with someone who is possessed with the devil. Oh, can you imagine what her friends would have said? Get rid of her, cast her out. But she held on, trying to coexist with a demon-possessed girl. We don't know her age, but there's no reason to believe she was a toddler. But the Bible says perfect love casts out fear, because fear has torment. God is not into that kind of fear. That's what the devil does, and the devil was doing it to this mom. Great moms are armed with a great determination, even in the face of Jesus' initial indifference. Jesus ignored her initially. Now, we don't know if he even turned to look at her. We don't know. What we do know is he didn't answer her initial request. Didn't answer. And she didn't go away. The disciples' rejection, send her away. What would you have done? Jesus isn't saying anything. He's not casting a vote yet. The disciples are absolutely casting a vote. Aren't you glad Jesus wasn't a democracy? It would have been 12-1. And Jesus hadn't cast his vote yet. I tell my kids when they were growing up, this is not a democracy. I am a benevolent dictator. You can all 10 of you can gang up on me, but if I don't think it's right, it's not happening. Send her away. She was determined in spite of Jesus' silence, the disciples' rejection, and even Jesus' explanation. He said, this has never happened before. This is not why I'm here. I'm not here for you. Now hear me carefully. Then who was he here for? I believe absolutely he was here for that woman. I absolutely believe that's the only reason Jesus visited Phoenicia. There is no other biblical explanation. But he's reminding her, I'm Jewish. I'm the Jewish Messiah. My ministry priority is to the Jews first. I'm sent to the house of Israel, and it's not appropriate for me to give the food, the bread of heaven, right, Jesus? to the dogs, to the Gentiles. Jesus wasn't being prejudiced. He was living in the moment of the culture in which he operated. He understood this. Jesus was not prejudiced. He wouldn't have been there if he were. But he's role-playing, maybe not the right term, but he is working in Realville. He's in the world he's in, a world of slavery, a world of demons, a world of idolatry, a world of hatred, a world of uncertainty. And can we say that world hasn't changed? Or it's put on a more appropriate veneer, but it is still there. We still worship Baal in America. I'm praying about a series to prove that, but I can prove it. We are probably the most idolatrous nation in history. We just don't recognize the old names, but they are there, moving and working in the background. Satan hasn't changed. He's just become a better marketer of his goods. Great moms acknowledge their great need. She comes to Jesus. He ignores her. The disciples say, send her away. He tells her, I'm not here for you. And he says, it's not appropriate to take the children's meat and give it to the dogs. And notice what she said. True, Lord. What does that mean? I understand what I am. Folks, this is where grace starts. I'm not here because I deserve it. I'm not asking this of you because I'm worthy. Folks, if you think you're worthy of God's grace, you're not. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Read Romans chapter 3. Their mouth is an open sepulcher. With their tongues they've used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips. God says in Isaiah 1, all our righteousnesses are like filthy rags. He goes on in Isaiah 1, said, but come, let's reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be like scarlet, they should be white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they'll be as wool. But you have to start with, true, Lord, I'm a sinner. I may be a great mom, I may be a great dad, I may be good at this, but we're a sinner before a holy God. She knew that. She knew that there was nothing. Remember that song, nothing in my hand I bring, simply to your cross I cling. She recognized her need. I'm not worthy. I have no bargaining chips here. I have nothing that he needs. But she asked anyway. Yet the dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. What is she saying here? Lord, Master. When she first met him, have mercy upon me, O Lord, thou Son of David. The reality is she knew who she was talking to. She knew probably more instinctively than the disciples that were around Jesus. They still struggled with who he was. And finally, great moms know the power of prayer. Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou Son of David. This is the official messianic title. Lord Kurios, supreme authority, not just over the Jews. Son of David, you're the prophesied Messiah. You're the Son of God. You're the Son of David. And then she simply said, that's who you are. I'm just me. Help me. Lord, Kurios, you have the authority. Help me. Remember that old song? I love those old songs. We try to have a blended service. Today we had 2 hymns. I love the old hymn books. I know enough about music to sound real horrible when I try to harmonize. If I have the music and the notes, sometimes I get it right. How many remember that old Southern gospel? Where could I go but to the Lord? Have nowhere else to turn. Finish this phrase. You'll never know that Jesus is all you need until it's all you got. Undoubtedly, she had exhausted every other resource. And she triumphed because of her great faith. Jesus himself. Jesus only made this statement 2 times. Only 2 times. It's interesting that both times it was to someone that wasn't Jewish. The Jews struggled with their faith. Why? Because they had religion. I don't need Jesus. I got religion. I got all the answers. The two people Jesus said, you have a great faith, was the Roman centurion. Like this mother, did not come to Jesus asking anything for himself. I have a servant who is grievously sick. Come and heal him. And then he said this, waiting for Jesus, didn't answer. I'm a man not of authority, I'm a man under authority. I understand authority. I understand you're the Lord. I understand you're the ultimate authority. You don't even have to come to my house to speak the word, and my servant will be healed. And Jesus said, oh, I have not found so great faith, not even in Israel. And here's the second time he says this, woman, you have a, megas is the Greek word. You have a mega faith. You have a huge faith. But what did Jesus say could happen if you had just a little faith in the right thing? Faith like a grain of mustard seed. It's not the size of the faith, it's where you put the faith you have. Remember the father of the demon-possessed boy? I have a little faith. Help my unbelief. Well, I'm going to put what little faith I have in you, Jesus. And both their children were healed. Because of your faith, be it unto thee as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. Jesus' detour, no other record. You read it, he went, I don't know, 50, 60 miles out of his way, maybe a little further. We have no record that he taught in any synagogue, no record that he ministered to any other human being, no lesson to his disciples. All of those may have taken place. But why did God reveal only this scene in that trip, which may have taken a couple of weeks? Why only this scene? Because this scene is important to us. There was a devoted mother who exercised more faith than most of the educated, faithful, religious Israelites, and as a result received her prayer request. Not for herself, but for her daughter. It's interesting that this is a repetition of an Old Testament situation. Jesus said in Luke, to the disciples and to the religious people, thinking God owed them because they were behaved, because they didn't behave like dogs, or did they? You'd be amazed at all stuff that go through this head, and I say, don't say that, Keith, don't say that. The Apostle Paul wrote, I think it's the church of Galatians, about the church, beware of dogs. Can God's people bite? Paul said, if you bite one another, be careful that you not be devoured one of another. To my shame, I've seen God's people behave like dogs. I probably barked or bit a time or two in my own life. Jesus was telling the religious people of his day, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elias, which was the Greek word name for Elijah. But unto none of them was he sent except to Sarepta, a city of Sidon, same place, Phoenicia. Remember, this is where Jezebel was from. Who was Elijah hiding from? Jezebel. God said, go to her hometown. What? That's the last place on earth I want to be. God said, trust me. Because not only was God going to provide for Elijah, but God was going to, I've commanded a widow woman to feed you. Elijah gets there and finds this woman gathering some sticks, and Elijah says, go give me some bread. And she said, I don't have anything, just a little bit of meal. I have enough to make one more loaf of bread for me and my son, then we're going to die. And what did Elijah say? Thus saith the Lord, the measure of wheat, the cruse of oil will not fail till the Lord sends rain. And that widow woman and her son became the host of the man of God. Jesus said there were lots of widows in Israel. There were a lot of desperate moms in Israel, but who did God send the man of God to? To this woman. Did she have faith? Make me first. How's that for faith? You do what, and by the way, God had already told her to do it. Right? I've commanded a woman to feed you. Elijah was simply a confirmation. Both of these women, both from the same town, Both come from a culture that worshiped demons. Both desperate. Both God went out of his way to send someone. And both had the opportunity for their faith to provide for their family. What great barriers are in your way, ladies? This message is not specifically to ladies, but we're talking about a lady. What barriers are in front of you? What is it that you can't overcome? What is it that you can't fix? What love motivates your prayers? I can only imagine the power of a praying mom when she's praying for her kids. What determination enables your drive? What need overwhelms you? What fear, what inadequacy keeps you from falling at the feet of Jesus and say, Lord, help me? Will you allow those things to keep you from or to drive you to Jesus? The Bible tells us about Elijah, the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man or woman avails much. The word effectual and fervent is two words in the English language. It's only one word in the Greek of the New Testament. It's energeo, energy. Moms, do you ever feel depleted of energy? Maybe that's your need. Going to God and God, I need more love because I'm just about dry. I need more patience because I'm out. I need more wisdom because I don't know how to deal. Let me tell you something, moms and dads. In case you weren't aware of this, your kids are facing a world you and I didn't have to face. Sin has always been sin, but sin has pulled the mask off in today's world. Your kids are growing up in a world that's crazy. I have a degree in psychology. We are infected with a mass psychosis in our culture. And our kids are being educated in that culture, just like this woman and her daughter were being educated in a culture saturated with demons. And some of those demons caught the heart of this little girl. Moms and dads, if we're not aware of it, some of those demonic influences can catch the hearts of our precious children. If that's not going to make you a desperate prayer warrior, mom and dad, I don't know what will. I put this in the bulletin. Lord, a prayer of a mom. Lord, who am I to teach the way to my children day by day? So prone myself to go astray. Aren't you glad God doesn't need perfect moms and dads to touch his heart? I teach them knowledge, but I know how faint they flicker and how low the candles of my knowledge glows. I teach them power to will and do, but only now to learn anew my own great weakness through and through. When you pray for others, does Satan ever remind you of your own failures? Does he ever distract you with your own fears, your own frustrations, your own mistakes? Lord, if their guide I still must be, let my precious children see their mother leaning hard on thee. It's not because I said so, kids. That doesn't work anymore. Didn't work for my generation, by the way. Doesn't work for this generation. You need to recognize the same thing that Elijah recognized when he stood boldly before Ahab and Jezebel and said, "Thus saith the Lord, in whose presence I stand. There shall not be rain to do these years, but by my word." Be aware that you are God's servant. It's no accident that you have the children you have. And kids, there's no accident that you grew up in the home you did. With all of its warts, with all of its inadequacies, with the failures and frailties of your mom and dad. And mom and dad, as your kids get older, they'll recognize them too. Yep. Can I get a witness back there, guys? Your kids don't need to see a perfect mom or perfect dad. They just need to see you leaning hard on Jesus. So who are you leaning on? Or what are you leaning on? Many of you know my testimony. I did not grow up in a Christian home. I grew up in an alcoholic home. I remember my mom took us to church when we were kids. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom wasn't. My dad shot my mom 6 times, almost killed her. My dad went to prison. My mom went to alcohol. I never remember seeing my mom praying. Not one time. Not one time in my life did I see my mom open a Bible, except when one of us had done something wrong and she became the bailiff of the court. She would find a Bible, she would open it, and she would make us place our hands on the Bible and swear it wasn't me. The Bible wasn't a guide. It was just something that we had somewhere that my mom pulled out in case of emergencies. I'm not saying my mom never prayed. I just never saw it. I'm not saying my mom never read the Bible. I just never saw her with the Bible open. When she died, I found in her apartment a Bible. I preached her funeral out of that Bible, because there's a Bible where every page in that Bible had been highlighted at least one time. It was a Bible of someone who knew God. And here I stand, probably 10, 15 years after her death, still wondering, whose Bible was that? Was that my mom's Bible? Is it possible? My mom lived such a duplicitous life that she had a deep faith that none of her children ever saw. That just doesn't make sense to me. I talked to my mom often about her soul. She kept dodging me. Or was that the Bible of some committed believer who loved my mom enough to invest in her life and actually give her their Bible? To this day, I don't know. But what I do know is I never saw my mom. Oh, she loved us. She held our family together. Do you know the Hebrew word for mother, aim, means the glue of the family? Did you know that? The glue of the family. I can stand here and honor my mom for keeping our family together when social services wanted to rip us away. She worked hard to keep our family together. But I never saw her leaning on God. Moms, particularly dads, don't go it alone. If you haven't already been there, you will be where this woman is. Desperate, broken, guilty. Maybe your own history repeating itself in the lives of your sons and your daughters. And in need, desperate need of Jesus. And all you need to do is overcome the obstacles of your pride and your past and get a hold of the hem of his garment and come as you are. If you're not a child of his, then why not? If you are a child of his, I can't say this often enough. Don't leave your children to ask the questions that me and my siblings have had to ask. Will we ever see mom again? What are you leaning on? Before I pray, I'm going to have, David came up with an idea this morning, and I honor him for